Okay, so we're here for 15 minutes with Andy Warhol, and Andy said in the future everybody will be famous for 15 minutes. He didn't know how right he was going to be, because with social media, Facebook and Snapchat and Twitter and all those things, everybody is famous for 15 minutes. They've got their own audience. I'm not sure that's what he envisioned necessarily, but here we are. So she said I was going to speak about the exhibition, and I would prefer to do that in the exhibition, so I'm going to quickly cover some other parts of Andy's career, and then maybe we'll convene back in the gallery and talk a little bit more about that if you like. So I'm going to bust through these slides. As we say, we're going to ride hard and fast. Okay? Everybody ready? Yippee-ki-yay. I won't say the other half. So how did we wind up being involved in Warhol at a Western museum? Well, our anonymous founder had a collection of Western art and decided he wanted to build this building and give it to the Northwest Georgia community and really all of the South as a gift after he sold his company. And he walked in my office one day and said, we're going to sell this company you've been working for, and we're going to build a Western art museum, and you're going to run it. After I came back to consciousness, I said, I don't know anything about art and I can't spell museum. And he said, well, it's going to take 3 years to build this building, get out there and learn something about it. So I set about doing that very thing. And in researching the collection, which was a lot of traditional Western art, here was these 14 Warhol images. And they kind of kept rolling around in the back of my mind. Why were they here? Why did he do them? Seemed so out of character for Andy, and seemed out of character for Western art. So quickly, let me show you a few highlights of the Booth Museum. That was the north entrance you're looking at. This is the south entrance. Here's the north entrance again. The original building did not include that glass box that you see there on the right. That was added in 2009. And as we zoom in, you go into that glass box. You're standing in the middle of that, looking into the old wing to the left and the new wing to the right. So we primarily collect living artist work. And our goal is to collect the best of traditional Western art, people that are doing things like Remington and Russell, and people who are doing things a little bit new and a little bit different. You might say a little more contemporary, although there's multiple uses of that word, so we'll stay away from that. The painting there in the center, just to give you a little scale, that's a Maynard Dixon 8 by 18 feet. Worth coming to see, just that one painting. As is this one by W.R. Lee, known as the Sagebrush Rembrandt. Or this one by Catherine Layton, done in the 1920s. Very rare for a woman artist to have done work like this that early. Or this one by E. Martin Hennings, one of the Taos Society of Artists members, was done in the 30s. So these are some of the older pieces in the collection, but we really exist to collect living artists, like this gentleman, Howard Turpning, who's the acknowledged master, the most award-winning living Western artist alive today. And some of his peers like Roy Anderson, Jim Reynolds. So these are the artists that are following the traditions of Western art and doing things pretty much the way Remington and Russell did them. They've got their own twists and their own voices. But we're also collecting this more modern Western art. You can see the influences, I think, perhaps in this piece of both Van Gogh and Thomas Hart Benton. Now, this artist happens to live in Ruidoso, New Mexico, and Roswell, New Mexico. So we always joke with him that the UFOs had something to do with his art looking so funky. Or Tom Ross. Anybody know who that is depicting? Doc Holliday. How do we know it's Doc Holliday? He had the shotgun when they went to the OK Corral because he had the longest coat, so he could hide the shotgun under his coat. And so people say, why is there a Western Art Museum in Georgia? Well, because of Doc Holliday. Doc Holliday was from Georgia, but so are a lot of other famous Western people who did great things in the West. Doc Holliday was from Griffin, Georgia, went to dental school in Philadelphia, and came back and was a dentist in Atlanta. Might even come through here at some point. But guess what? He went to go get married, found out the gal he wanted to get married to was his cousin. And they said, you can't get married. So she became a nun. He went to Dodge City, Kansas, and became a gambler. And their niece, both of them, their niece was, guess who? Margaret Mitchell. How cool is that? How many of y'all knew Doc Holliday's niece was Margaret Mitchell? Not one of y'all. So you learned one thing tonight if you learned nothing else. Ed Nell. So our museum is an educational institution, and when we say that, we think of this. We think of a traditional school group coming for a field trip, but we try to make it so much more than that. We do 2 adult lectures every month at least. When we have exhibit openings, we always have speakers. We do a symposium a couple times a year. In fact, next weekend is our Cowboy Symposium, and out on the table is flyers for that. It's a great weekend. We have an art history symposium with 4 great speakers on Friday, and then throughout the weekend we have a big Cowboy Festival. Guess who's coming to Cartersville, Georgia? The Sons of the Pioneers. They're going to be playing our Saturday night featured act. And throughout the day we have gunfight reenactments, we have Indian powwows, we have chuck-wagon cooking going on, cowboy music and poetry throughout the 2 days. It's really a lot of fun. A couple other collections at the museum is this collection of one-page signed letters by each president, along with a photograph of each or a reproduction of a black and white painting. We also have a Civil War art collection. And most of these are by living artists as well. So these are artists still making their living interpreting the Civil War. And there's still enough collectors out there interested in it that they can make a living. So amongst all that art were 14 Cowboys and Indians images by the guy in his mama's arms there on the right side. That's Andy Warhol. Now the family name was Warhola, and they were from Eastern Europe. They moved to Pittsburgh, where his father worked in the steel mills, and they lived on the wrong side of the tracks, as we might say. Fairly poor immigrant family. But like everybody else in that time period, he was born in 1928, so he grew up in the 30s. He was in love with the idea of the West, and he was particularly in love with the idea of celebrity and the movies. So any chance he got, he snuck off to the movies. Now this cap pistol and these books were found in his home when he passed. And he was an incredible hoarder and collector. He collected collections. There was enough stuff in his house it took him 10 days at Christie's auction house to sell everything in his house. From Indian artifacts to cookie jars to clocks to jewelry to gold nuggets to these little giant books, to you name it. He even had this Roy Rogers clock in his collection. Now these might have been things he also had as a kid. We don't think he had these all the time from when he was a kid till he was an adult. But he had collected these, I think, because he either had them as a kid earlier or wanted to have had them. They might not have been able to afford them. He also had a lot of movie memorabilia in his collection. In fact, one scrapbook we do know he had kept from childhood on through adulthood that had pictures of his favorite stars in it, and Roy Rogers was among them. Now, Andy spent a lot of time with his mom. His mom was a very devout, religious person. She took him to church every weekend. And they belonged to the Orthodox Church. And this area in the back of the church that you're seeing on the screen is called the Iconostasis. And it has all these icon paintings in it. And here's another shot of one. What does it remind you of from his work? Can you see how that might have imprinted itself? Staring at those for hours every weekend. But this might have had an influence on these multiple image pieces he did. So he went to Carnegie Mellon there in Pittsburgh. Philip Pearlstein, the famous painter, was a classmate of his. They both moved to New York. He became an illustrator. He did a lot of magazine articles, was very well known for his style of drawing called the blotted line technique. And it was quite different from what a lot of the other illustrators were doing at the time. But he longed to be a fine artist. He didn't want to be an illustrator. And he started out doing some of these pieces that would be the forerunners of his pop art style. A lot of them had superheroes in them. A lot of them were taken from advertisements in the newspapers, and he would turn them into art. But he couldn't get a break. He kept trying to get the curators and the art dealers to look at his stuff, and everybody was yawning until he did these. And he had a show at Ferris Gallery in Los Angeles in the early 60s. And just like that pile of Campbell soup cans out in the reception area, A gallery down the street from Ferris thought it was hysterical that he was showing this, and so they put a pile of Campbell soup cans in the window of their gallery and said, "Buy the real thing, 19 cents." His paintings were going for like $400 or $500, and they thought it was ridiculous. Well, an AP photographer came by and took a picture of Andy's pieces and of these soup cans, and it ran in a lot of newspapers making fun of it. But it had the opposite effect. It actually brought him to the attention of a lot of pop art collectors. And so the gallery that was trying to make fun of him helped launch his career. We were joking earlier about it. There is no bad publicity, right? As long as I spell your name right. So our main interest in Warhol is not in Campbell soup cans, but in what he did in the West. And that is an exhibition we're developing for a couple of years from now, based partly on my master's thesis and working with a couple other museums, the National Cowboy Museum in Oklahoma City and the Tacoma, Washington Art Museum. So the exhibition will open at our place in 2019 and travel to those others through 19 and 20. So my thesis and the research that we did related to the collection in the Booth Museum was, does this come out of nowhere in Andy's career, which is so big that it is unbelievable? You know, when we say he had a factory, he literally had a factory. They were churning out artwork, particularly with these screen prints that they could make by the hundreds. And when they sold that collection, they sold enough to fund the Andy Warhol Foundation for Visual Arts, which gives grants still today to art projects. They are still selling art from that collection today. He died in 1987. That's 30 years ago. They've been selling art and giving art away for 30 years, and there's still stuff left. They had also given a huge chunk of it to the Andy Warhol Museum in Pittsburgh. And there's still more than they would ever show there at that museum. His oeuvre is so big, he touched so many subjects and did so much art, and yet he only lived to be 58 years old. Imagine if he'd lived another 20 or 30 years, how much he would have produced. And America hasn't seen a celebrity artist like him since. I don't know that we ever will. He was instantly recognizable in the 70s and the 80s. He was part of the Studio 54 in crowd, even though he was an introvert and very shy. Heck, he was even on the Love Boat. You remember that? They didn't just let anybody on the Love Boat. You had to be a celebrity. But he hobnobbed with guys who were involved in the Western thing as part of his friends group, including Dennis Hopper, who he was very close to. In fact, he and Dennis Hopper, for a short period of time, owned an Indian artifact store in Taos, New Mexico. Who knew, right? Clint Eastwood was a friend. He did his portrait. Some of you probably know Andy was also a filmmaker, in addition to being a painter and a sculptor and lots of other things. And he actually made a couple of cowboy movies, one called Horse and this one called Lonesome Cowboys. Anybody ever see that movie? The reaction was mixed, shall we say. It was made Film of the Year in San Francisco, was confiscated in Atlanta for being pornographic. Those are kind of the two ends of the response to the movie. And it really foreshadows Brokeback Mountain, if you're familiar with that story. But these are the two stars. But these were the real stars, the handsome cowboys. So it's no wonder that he was attracted to Elvis as a Western movie star when he decided to do Elvis as one of his celebrity subjects. So here's Elvis, teen idol singer, right? That would have been Americana on a base level. Elvis as a teen singing idol becomes matinee movie idol. That takes it up to level 2. But Elvis as a teen singing idol, matinee movie idol, gone Western gunslinging hero, now that's triple Americana. They say that Warhol was America's mirror. He held a mirror up to America and said, this is what you are. Your Campbell soup, your Brillo pads, your Marilyn Monroe, your Elvis, but you're also the electric chair and death and disasters. So Elvis is a gunslinging movie star, triple Americana, right? Some of his most recognizable early images. And they're Western. The most valuable piece in Andy's career, probably the Marilyn Monroes have sold for the most, particularly the one that was shot. If you've ever heard of Marilyn Shot Red, when he was shot in the factory, one of the bullets lodged in one of the paintings, and that one sold for a huge amount of money. But on any given day, who knows? Some of you who follow the art markets may have seen a piece of John Michael Basquiat's graffiti art, who was a good friend of Warhol's, sold for $100 million a few months ago. And it wasn't a great piece of art. So you never can tell with the auctions. Now, Andy was somebody who said he had no social consciousness. His art was not political. He intended to make no statements with it. It wasn't about anything. It was the surface. What you see is what you get. There's no intent behind it. Now, if you look in the exhibition, you'll see Lenin, you'll see Nixon, you'll see an electric chair. Are those the subjects of somebody who has no social consciousness and no political agenda? I'm not so sure. And how about this piece? This is based on Russell Means. Anybody ever heard of Russell Means? He was the leader of AIM, which was the American Indian Movement, which is a group of radical Indians in the 70s who decided to go back and look up some of the federal treaties that we had made with the Indians, one of which said if there was any federal land not being put to good use, the Indians were welcome to it. And they seized Alcatraz Island in San Francisco Harbor. They seized Wounded Knee and other places around the country and said, this is not being used, we're claiming it in the name of the American Indian. So in our bicentennial year of 1976, Warhol chooses to do a series of paintings of this gentleman who was involved in those activities. Now, do you think there's any coincidence? Gee, do you think? Yet he has no social consciousness and no political awareness. And he's going to do a radical Indian series of portraits in our bicentennial year. He also was good friends with several Native American artists and collected their work. This is R.C. Gorman. He was known as the Indian Picasso, and he and Warhol were good friends. They used to hang out and drink at the Taos Inn in Taos, New Mexico. And here's Gorman with his portrait proudly displayed in his home. Also, Fritz Scholder, a very important Native American artist, had his portrait done by Warhol. And Warhol collected Indian artifacts. One whole day of that 10-day auction was just his Indian collection. Now, he was known for collecting not the best quality stuff, because he really was a hoarder, and he liked to have more stuff cheaper than buying one quality piece. He'd buy 10 low-quality pieces. You can see the holes in this blanket. And he said he loved to buy the ones with the holes in them because they were cheaper and they were more sculptural. How big a cop-out is that? They're sculptural. You could have just left it at they're cheaper. Right, right. Yes. Many of the famous modern artists collected Indian artifacts and African artifacts. They thought the primitive art was the most pure art, and it influenced a lot of modern artists. In fact, Teddy Roosevelt, when he visited the Armory Show, if you can remember that, in 1913, which was the first major modern art show in America, asked exiting the show, said, "There's more great modern art in the Navajo rug I have at home than there's in that whole building." And Andy probably would have agreed with him. Andy said that the American quilt makers and the American Indian women weavers were the best artists in the world. So he admired their work greatly. He also was often described by interviewers as always wearing cowboy boots. In the collection at the Warhol Museum, they have about 36 pairs of his cowboy boots. Some of them are pretty dressy, but some of them have paint splattered all over them, meaning he was wearing them when he was painting in the studio. Here's just a small sample of some of the stuff that was found in his home. He had a 33-room home on Park Avenue in New York. He lived in about 4 rooms. The rest of it was full of stuff. And it was in boxes and bags. A lot of it had never been unpacked. This was after they fluffed the house and had Robert Mapplethorpe come shoot the photographs for the auction catalog. So you say, well, he did a fair amount of Western art. I can't think of any. You show me the Elvis, you show me the other movie stars that he did. What else did he do Western that I might recognize? How about this guy? This one actually has diamond dust on it. Some of the prints that he did, if he thought it would add to the piece, they sprinkled diamond dust in the background to give it a glitter effect. Now you might not think this is Western, but it's in the exhibition, so I want to include it. Many times we talk about outer space as the final frontier. Space cowboys, the idea of going to the frontier, it's a very Western thing to think about. So maybe we could include that in the lot. The American eagle, of course, is the symbol of the whole country, but the majority of them are out west. This is from his endangered species portfolio. The Howdy Doody was from his myths portfolio, which he included himself in, by the way, as a myth. The bighorn sheep was also in the endangered species suite. And how about the Wicked Witch of the West? Is that Western? Can be if we say it is, right? And this is kind of fun with the Howdy Doody. This is when Howdy Doody came in to have his portrait done. Andy would usually shoot Polaroids of the people he was doing portraits of with a big shot Polaroid. That's the way he got his source material. So here's Howdy posing for his picture that Andy shot with his Polaroid, and there's the resulting piece. Pretty fun, huh? And what's more Western than have gun, will shoot? That's a warning to anybody. And Atlanta's own Ted Turner, he's now a big buffalo rancher in the West, so let's throw him in there too, won't we? Is that fair? Sure. So Andy's main method for producing art was screen printing in terms of the largest volume of work he did. Many of his paintings were done through a silk screening method, and all of the prints generally were done that way in the factory. And it literally was a factory. There were lots of people working there and helping out. Most of the great prints were done by a gentleman named Rupert Smith, and he did all of the ones in the Cowboys and Indians suite, including the 2 out there in the exhibition. So let's take a quick look at how that works. You first start with a source image. In this case, this is Annie Oakley from the biography on her. This is a photograph of her wearing all her medals. You might make a halftone of that so that you get the shading and the lines down. Then you might do a drawing from that, which Warhol would often do by projecting the halftone up onto a screen and tracing it. You can see he's reversed the image in the process. And then you're going to have a screen for each color. And so little by little it's going to color in, kind of like color by number. And you're going to end up with this piece as a finished piece. So you want to see that again? Boop, 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 boop. Easy, right? Except you had to cut a screen for each one of those colors, so it was a very time-consuming process. But once you had it going, you could go pretty quickly. And Warhol's process in doing this was to do 36 of each print that he might publish with 36 different color combinations. Now, often he might direct the printer with some ideas he had, but often he left it to their own ingenuity to come up with the combinations of colors they might work from. From those 36, they would then pick the one they thought would sell the best, and they would print 250 of those. So they would be marked trial proofs 1 through 36, which both of the ones on exhibition from the Booth Museum are trial proofs, so they say whatever number of 36. Then the ones that they published and actually sold would have been X of 250. So if you have a trial proof, it's a truly original piece. The colors are unique. Yet they're not as valuable as many of the edition prints, which makes no sense because they're original pieces. Now his source material for these would vary from a lot of different things. This happens to be a lobby card for who knows the Spanish and can translate. which the American title was The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. Remember that one with Jimmy Stewart? So he's used that pose down there in the corner to create these images. The one in the center is pretty close to the one that's in the exhibition as a trial proof. This is the one that was the edition print that they picked they thought was the best color combination and the most saleable. Same with the Annie Oakley from the ones we saw before. He didn't care who he ripped off for the image. This is a Matthew Brady of General Custer. These were some of the options in color. This is the one they actually chose, which is interesting to put Custer in white. Here's Geronimo from a famous photograph. Here's one of the options. Here's another option. Here's another option. Which one you like best? 1, 2, or 3? 1, 2, 3. Which one? 1's the one they picked. So in our exhibition, we hope to have quite a number of color combinations and actually have a poll with an iPad or good old paper and pencil and let you vote on which one you would have picked. And then when you go in another part of the exhibition, they'll tell you which one actually got picked and show you all 10 that were published. Now, this is what they normally would do. They would pick a theme, they would do 10 images and publish those. This particular project was very troublesome because Warhol's business manager got duped into giving up artistic control of the project, and the guy who was in control was an investment banker who liked jerking Andy around, and they did 14 images instead of 10 that they did trial proofs of, and then whittled it down to 10. And his diary over the last year of his life, leading up to his death in 1987, he constantly complained about this project being the most contentious he'd ever worked on. Some of the images in this suite are actually objects, and it's the only one he ever did where he mixed objects and portraits in the same portfolio. This is actually a mask that's in the Museum of the National American Indian, and he went and shot Polaroids of it and then created this image from it. He also worked from a postcard to create this image. This is a famous photograph of Roosevelt. Another object that's in the Museum of the American Indian, as is these Kachina dolls. And interestingly, he worked from an American coin. This is an Indian head nickel. What word has he emphasized in the design? Liberty. How ironic he has the American Indian staring down the word liberty. Again, is this a guy with no social consciousness, no political awareness? What do you think? I don't think that's by accident. He also did the other side of the nickel. This is one of the rejected images that was not included. He also ripped off this painting by Charles Schreivogel and created this print, which was also not included. This one that's in the exhibition, not included, didn't make the cut, and neither did Sitting Bull. So those 4 were not used in the exhibition. Now, I mentioned before, Andy included himself in the Myths suite. This is the image that he put in. You can kind of see the half profile and then the elongated shadow. So what's mythic about it? What is the myth? What is the mystery? We're left to wonder. Now, I had a class of students here earlier today, and we walked through the exhibition and talked a lot about Andy and his approach and why is he important. And I quoted the famous curator at MoMA who said, in trying to assess Andy's importance, does he think we're simple? Is he cynical? Is he kidding? Does he think we're simple? Are we? Maybe. Thank you very much.